Michelle, thank you so much for joining me tonight. We're going to be talking about decarbonizing your supply chain, which I think is a challenge for everyone working in this space. As we're talking about the business value of sustainability, obviously, the returns your company's making is a big part of that, but there's also trying to hit that cost savings element, finding efficiencies. You have a really unique role at SingPost where procurement sits under your purview. Can you tell us a little bit about that intersection of Chief Sustainability Officer and procurement?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and I think it amazes some people when I tell them that story that, on top of the sustainability work that I do, I've got procurement in my portfolio as well, and that raised several eyebrows. Yeah. And I thought that was actually quite a strategic move because procurement has got a lot to do with influencing not just Scope 3, right? It actually influences all Scope 1, 2, and 3, all the three dirty numbers, right? It's got and that design, of that combination is interestingly allowing me, right, to change the way the company procures by putting the consideration of carbon right at the beginning, right, where it influences not only how you use, but what are you buying, right? That will actually influence the use of it eventually, and what comes out from your operations, right, which is what all the carbon emissions is all about.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I would love to hear a little bit more about your suppliers, who you're working with. Talk about a tangled web you weave within, a company like SingPost. It's, Postal Service Logistics. You're working with big and small suppliers. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between the two that you observe when it comes to decarbonization efforts?
Yeah, indeed. So with the process of mapping our Scope 3 inventory right now as we're developing it, that actually allows you to gain better insights into your supply chain. So very much to what Harry is talking about, right? It's all in the data. And, having collected data painfully in the last couple of years, so and we're able to gain certain insights, very much guided by GHG protocol on the Scope 3 accounting, and you're able to understand where the material contributors lie. And from there, you are then able to prioritize where are you able to focus to make the biggest impact in reduction. And that's exactly what we have done. And suppliers need to be on board. Now, if you have anyone who has calculated Scope 3, right, it doesn't surprise me. It's about 80% of your carbon footprint, right? At least 70. And with that number, obviously, your supply chain plays a big part. Now, with supply chain, you can't control directly what they do, whether they even give you the data, correct data. And data accuracy, well, it's great to have that later on in terms of the Scope 3. There needs to be a transition to help the suppliers who have not actually come on board data collection process, right? And what we have done is we have got a plan to be engaging with the suppliers and help them ease into it. Businesses have got a lot of pressures nowadays. They've got to look at the bottom line. They have got regulatory requirements. They've got inflationary pressures, labor issues, lots to consider. So with that in a balance of sustainability, you need to help them on their journey, right? And say, for example, in terms of SingPost, we have got the supplier code of conduct to at least first communicate what exactly are our expectations, right? But doesn't mean that you can't get onto that and we'll drop you. No, that's not the right approach, right? Instead, we will take them on the journey with us, right? And we help them understand, okay, so perhaps these are some of the tools that you can be using, right? And for certain countries, the governments are very proactive in offering assistance, and Singapore is one of those, right? Whether it's Enterprise Singapore or whether it's Singapore Business Federation, they are all offering assistance to small and medium enterprises, especially, right, to get on that journey. And when we are engaging with our supply chain, with their cost pressures that they are facing, we do differentiate who are the bigger boys, right, and who are the ones who will probably need assistance. So that differentiation is probably quite important to take note of, right, and to engage accordingly as well.
You know, you mentioned the sort of government stepping in to assist some of these SMEs on this. I'm curious, in your experience engaging with that, you know, smaller level of supplier, is that, you know, inflation pressure and the cost burden of this the main barrier to them being brought on board, or are there other challenges that are sort of preventing them from, you know, immediately coming on board and, you know, needing a little bit more time?
I think cost is just one of the components, right? A lot of the small and medium enterprises actually don't understand the urgency of them embarking on this journey as yet. I recall there was an article by Business Times, I think shortly after Accra, put its recommendation forward, requiring non-listed companies to be reporting on climate-related disclosures. A lot of small and medium enterprise actually didn't think there was a need for them to be embarking on, sooner. And my advice is actually, the contrary. You should get onto the journey right now. Right? It takes a while, and a lot of them don't know how to as well. So that's probably the bigger challenge that they are facing, and they don't know that the bigger boys are actually changing the way they procure, right? Because a lot of companies now are facing, their net zero pressures.
Yeah.
A lot of companies has already put through their net zero targets, and they cannot not do anything, right? Right. So with that, procurement is going to be one of the large aspects of it. And like I mentioned earlier, it's not just the Scope 3 that is coming on board. It's also in terms of influencing and impacting the Scope 1 and 2. So obviously, smaller companies will need to get on it, and help is required.
Yeah, absolutely. Harry and David mentioned the word onerous quite a bit during their session, when it comes to the mandatory standards and the different, disclosure pieces that companies are facing today. Do you find these things onerous at this point, or are you sort of working through, the shift from the mandatory standards to voluntary reporting?
Yeah, so we've gone through a journey ourselves, right? So since SGX Redco has required listed companies to start reporting on sustainability, we have since started on that, and many companies have jumped on board that, but we would have missed the opportunity if we are only focusing on it from a compliance reporting basis, right? We actually see a lot of value in what that reporting brings to the business and the benefits that it brings. Let me give you an example. Scope 1 and 2, by having the visibility, collecting the data and reporting it, you know where your footprint, what the sources of the carbon emissions are coming from. And from there, you are able to, in a very organized and disciplined manner, look at the data, analyze it, and be very focused and targeted in your reduction initiatives. And with data, you're able to understand where the material areas are and make very meaningful reductions. And that's exactly what we have done. So having benefited from understanding, yes, it might be onerous, right? There's a lot of engagement internally, but as long as you're able to prove the business case, right? And that's how we have done it with our internal stakeholders, to help them understand what this data is going to do and help us. And we are actually showing in terms of financial savings on the bottom line. Now, on the flip side, there's a lot of customers and investors who are also asking for this data.
Sure.
There's an opportunity for businesses to commercialize that data that you have, right? It can be very valuable from that sense as well.
Yeah, That's very interesting. You mentioned kind of engaging with your executive leadership team, making sure that they're bought in. I think it sounds like the structure of the company and your sort of role speaks to that a little bit more. And you also mentioned earlier just sort of that the challenge today is that business leaders are facing so many different priorities coming at them. Can you give us an example of a time that you faced, some business changes or shifts that maybe didn't put into question your sustainability goals, but sort of intersected up against that, and how you sort of worked through another business priority while being able to maintain, your sustainability prowess?
Yeah, so one very scenario that plays to that very well is our recent acquisition into a business in Australia, and we have now become one of the top players in logistics in that market. And one way to look at it is, oh my goodness, you've bought a really big organization, and in transportation that's going to add up, in your carbon emissions, right? Well, I look at it from a glass half full, where it is an opportunity for us to decarbonize another company and helping the industry decarbonize itself. And that's what we'll need to do as well when we are looking at investments, whether it's into your infrastructure or into new businesses. We must consider sustainability as part of the consideration. It is not one of the things by the side that you should be considering, right? It needs to be part of it. It's just like how you procure. A certain percentage of that consideration must be there because you have set yourself targets. And by achieving those targets, you are also enjoying the benefits of cost savings. And in a way, you are also increasing your probability of generating better income, better revenue, right? Because you're able to capture a better market.
Yeah. I think that's really, a good point on sort of just those business challenges that people are facing and how it has to be at the forefront of this. Otherwise, it's
Definitely
going to get lost. I love your perspective on glass half full and just, this isn't scary if you see a company that your company is trying to acquire that has, maybe metrics that you wouldn't like them to have, but it is an opportunity to have that sort of influence more broadly. I am curious just, if you could give us a piece of advice for proving the business value of sustainability. I think we probably have a lot of people in this room tonight who are coming from sustainability teams, the people who are out in the weeds doing this work with varying levels of buy-in from their internal stakeholders. So can you tell us how you approach that internally? I know that, you mentioned it a little bit before, but what would you tell those people in our audience on how they can get buy-in from their stakeholders?
Right. Be very patient, over-communicate, and demonstrate in financial terms, right? We have actually also adopted internal carbon pricing. So when you have that mechanism, you help the business leaders understand sustainability and carbon from the viewpoint of the dollar sign. And when you actually do that, and if you can still be really profitable in the decarbonization journey, I think you've proven your point.
Yeah.
Right. So, and in terms of over-communicating, you just need to help people understand on an ongoing basis. Now, sustainability is an ever-evolving subject. And there's always new ways and case studies that present itself that demonstrates the value and the benefits to the business, right? And of course, it can't always be coming from external sources. Internally, prove your point, right, with real numbers in terms of cost savings and potentially also revenue of how with sustainability, how you are able to capture additional market share, right? So we have recently had one of these circumstances, and it was a great opportunity for me not to mention it. I just have to grab that opportunity and actually help people realize, look, it's because you have invested your efforts, right? And now it's actually showing the fruits of your labor. So I think, you do need to have a lot of these proof points, right? And communicate the proof points because if it's not, communicated, it's an opportunity lost in converting another person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Speak in dollar signs and over-communicate are our takeaways for everyone. You had mentioned, scopes 1 and 2. We of course, our session is focusing on supply chain and scope 3 because it is, to your earlier point, such a big piece of people's emissions puzzle and often the most challenging to solve with these, data integrity issues. But I'm just curious, as someone who's working in this field, when you're looking at sort of the outlook for how the standards are impacting scopes 1 and scopes 2, are we still in that phase? When do you think we'll actually reach meaningful impact when it comes to scope 3 as a result of some of the disclosures and standard setting that we're seeing now?
Yeah, so I think with the recent developments of S1 and S2 reporting requirements, that will hasten things up a little bit, right? And with the bigger companies who are obligated with the reporting requirements, they will have an influence on their supply chain, right? And they will obviously have to start, the supply chain will start with the scope 1 and 2, but eventually there's no escaping from scope 3. Yeah. So slowly but surely, as companies are transitioning, and scope 3 isn't very straightforward to account for, and a lot of people are using the spend base, right? But I think as more and more people are commercializing the sustainability, you will get to better improvement in data collection. And for example, after you have actually advanced very well into scope 1 and 2, then the next step for people is to allow their customers to have visibility on data, embark on life cycle assessment, for example, to give them a better visibility of the carbon from the product and the services that they're procuring. So that will actually help the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you had mentioned earlier, sort of the various stakeholders who can influence a company's decision to focus on sustainability, whether it's investors or different external pressures. You just mentioned customers. Is that something that you're hearing quite a bit at SingPost? Are your customers interested in hearing how you're progressing on these goals?
Increasingly. I'm having a lot more calls with customers now. And they are actually trying to understand, okay, so do you have a net zero target? What are you doing to reduce, and how are you able to give us better visibility of our carbon? Are you responding to CDP? Are you doing this? Are you doing... So they are very well informed now, right? And companies cannot ignore that anymore, right? It's got to be part of the formula in trying to generate your revenues moving forward. And to look at your bottom line, obviously, by looking at that, that's going to help you manage your operating cost as well.
Absolutely. Well, I think you've proved the business value of sustainability to me tonight just through our conversation. So, Michelle, thank you so much for joining me. We really appreciate you being here. And thanks to all of you for being such a wonderful audience. I would also love to thank our summit advisor, Schneider Electric, for making tonight's dinner possible. We are live tomorrow on our main stage just downstairs in the Grand Ballroom for the start of the Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit. But in the meantime, please enjoy your food, enjoy your dessert, mingle, and have a great evening. Thank you very much.